When Walter and Margaret Ashcroft died only 3 months apart, their children gathered in attorney Harold Bennett's office to hear the will. Victor inherited the family house. Caroline received the savings and the car. Naomi, the daughter who had given up her apartment, her career plans, and 5 years of her life to care for her parents through illness and decline, received a detached garage on Cedar Hollow Lane, appraised at just $10. Her brother called it fair. Her sister didn't disagree. Alone and heartbroken, Naomi drove to the garage expecting nothing more than dust and forgotten tools. Instead, behind a hidden door she had never noticed before, she would discover a secret her father had spent 40 years building in silence. And that secret would change everything she thought she knew about the man she had loved her entire life. 3 months after burying her father, Naomi Ashcroft found herself sitting in a stiff leather chair inside Harold Bennett's law office. Rain tapped softly against the window behind the attorney's desk. The room smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and old books. It was the kind of office where people received life-changing news every day. Naomi doubted hers would be one of them. Across from her sat her older brother Victor, scrolling through emails on his phone. Beside him sat Caroline, adjusting the strap of her designer handbag and occasionally glancing at her watch. Neither of them had stayed long after the funeral. Neither of them had spent 5 years watching their mother's memories disappear one piece at a time. Harold Bennett opened a thick folder and adjusted his glasses. "Your father was very specific," he said. Victor looked up. "Good," he replied. "Dad always liked things organized." Harold nodded. He certainly did. The reading began. The family home went first. The 4-bedroom house where they had all grown up, where Margaret had planted roses every spring and Walter had repaired everything with his own hands, was left entirely to Victor. Victor nodded, as though the outcome had always been obvious. That makes sense. No one challenged him. Next came the savings account and the family sedan. Both went to Caroline. She offered a small smile. "Okay." Then Harold paused. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked directly at Naomi. Something about his expression seemed different, almost cautious. "To my daughter, Naomi Ashcroft," he read slowly, "I leave the detached garage located at 18 Cedar Hollow Lane. Appraised value, $10. Silence filled the room. Naomi blinked. Surely she had heard wrong. "A garage?" Victor asked. "That's correct," Harold said. $10, Caroline added. Harold glanced down at the document. "That is the listed value." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Well, I guess Dad had his reasons." Naomi stared at the papers in Harold's hands. 5 years. 5 years of canceled plans. 5 years of hospital visits. 5 years of helping her mother eat, bathe, dress, and remember. 5 years of sitting beside her father as he watched the woman he loved disappear before his eyes. And in the end, she inherited a garage worth $10. Victor stood and buttoned his jacket. "Looks straightforward enough." Caroline rose as well. It was what Dad wanted. Neither seemed interested in discussing it further. They exchanged brief goodbyes and walked out together. The office door closed behind them. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Naomi remained seated. Harold removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he leaned forward. "Your father spent nearly 2 hours writing this will." Naomi looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means he considered every word carefully." She laughed bitterly. "Carefully enough to leave me a $10 garage?" Harold's eyes softened. "Your father told me something that day." Naomi waited. "He said each child should receive exactly what they need." The words lingered in the room. Naomi didn't understand them. Not yet. She stood slowly and accepted the small envelope Harold handed her. Inside was a single key, the garage key. Outside, the rain had stopped. Clouds drifted across the afternoon sky as she walked toward her car. The metal key felt cold in her palm. For a moment, she considered throwing it into the nearest storm drain and driving away forever. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket. Because no matter how hurt she felt, one question refused to leave her mind. Why would Walter Ashcroft spend 2 hours writing a will just to leave his devoted daughter a $10 garage? Naomi did not drive to the garage that day. Instead, she drove home. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because everything has. For 5 years, every room had revolved around someone else's needs. Her mother's medication schedule had been taped to the refrigerator. Doctor appointments had filled calendars. Emergency phone numbers had been written beside the kitchen phone. Every day had belonged to Margaret or Walter. Now both were gone, and the silence seemed louder than any sound. Naomi dropped her keys onto the kitchen counter and stood motionless. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains her mother had chosen years earlier. Dust drifted lazily through the golden light. The house still smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. It still felt like them. That was the hardest part. She wandered into the living room. Her father's recliner sat exactly where he had left it. The television remote rested on the armrest. His reading glasses remained on the small side table beside it. For a moment, Naomi could almost imagine he would walk through the front door and ask what was for dinner. Instead, there was only silence. She sat down and closed her eyes. The memories came immediately. 5 years earlier, she had been living in Burlington, Vermont. She worked long shifts as an emergency room nurse. The work was exhausting, but she loved it. She had a small apartment overlooking a busy street, a circle of friends, a future. Then came the phone call. Her mother had gotten lost driving home from the grocery store, a route she had driven for 20 years. The diagnosis followed 2 weeks later. Alzheimer's disease. Naomi still remembered sitting in the neurologist's office. Margaret had smiled at a painting on the wall while the doctor explained what the disease would do. Slowly, relentlessly, piece by piece, it would steal memories first, then independence, then recognition. Eventually, everything. 3 days later, Naomi packed her belongings into her car and drove home. Nobody asked her to. Nobody pressured her. She simply knew someone had to be there. Victor offered sympathy from Minneapolis. Caroline called from California and promised to visit when she could. Neither came. Not often. Not when it mattered most. The first year wasn't terrible. Margaret forgot appointments and misplaced items. The second year became harder. She began wandering outside at night. She forgot neighbors she had known for decades. She sometimes mistook Naomi for a stranger. By the third year, she no longer remembered her daughter's name. The memory still hurt. "Who are you?" Margaret had asked one morning. Naomi had frozen. "I'm Naomi, Mom." Margaret shook her head. "No, you're not." The words had felt like a knife. Yet Naomi stayed. Every day, every night. She learned how to help her mother bathe, how to calm panic attacks, how to smile through insults spoken by a disease instead of a person. Meanwhile, Walter grew older too. The strong man who could repair anything suddenly needed help carrying groceries, needed reminders for appointments, needed someone to sit beside him after difficult nights. Naomi became both daughter and caregiver. Months blurred into years. Birthdays passed. Relationships faded. Friends stopped calling. Even Nathan Reeves, the man she once thought she might marry, slowly disappeared from her life. She had chosen her family, and she had never regretted it, not once. Margaret died on a cold March morning, peacefully. At home, Naomi held one hand. Walter held the other. When it was over, neither spoke. There were no words left. 4 months later, Walter was gone too. The memory remained painfully clear. Naomi had gone looking for him after he failed to answer his phone. She found him inside the garage on Cedar Hollow Lane, collapsed beside a workbench, a pencil still clutched in his hand. The paramedics told her the stroke had been instant. He had not suffered. That should have comforted her. It didn't. Back in the present, Naomi opened her eyes. Night had fallen outside. The house was dark, empty, and for the first time since the will reading, she looked toward the small brass key resting on the coffee table, the garage. The $10 inheritance, the place where her father had spent so many Saturday mornings. Maybe Harold Bennett was wrong. Maybe there was nothing there, just old tools and dust. But suddenly, Naomi needed to know. The next morning, she would finally drive to Cedar Hollow Lane and discover what her father had left behind. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Naomi left the house shortly after sunrise. The brass key sat on the passenger seat beside her. She drove through town without turning on the radio. The quiet felt appropriate somehow. Within 15 minutes, she reached Cedar Hollow Lane. The street looked exactly as she remembered. Narrow, quiet, lined with aging maple trees whose branches stretched over the cracked pavement. As a child, she had occasionally accompanied Walter there on Saturday mornings. He would disappear inside the garage for hours while she sat in the truck coloring or reading books. Whenever she asked what he did inside, he always gave the same answer. Just tinkering, Bug. That had been his nickname for her since she was little. Just tinkering, nothing more. At least, that was what she had always believed. The detached garage stood near the end of the lane, a plain concrete structure with faded gray paint and a rusted roll-up door. Nothing about it looked valuable. Nothing about it looked worth $10. Naomi parked and stepped out. For several moments, she simply stood there. The building suddenly felt important, like a final piece of her father she had never understood. Finally, she walked to the door and inserted the key. The lock clicked open smoothly. Someone had maintained it carefully, probably Walter. She pulled the door upward. The smell hit her immediately. Fresh wood, linseed oil, sawdust. The scent was so familiar that her chest tightened. It smelled exactly like her father. Inside, sunlight streamed through narrow windows high on the walls. A long workbench stretched across one side of the garage. Above it hung dozens of tools. Every hammer, every chisel, every handsaw. Each one rested perfectly within black outlines drawn on a pegboard. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was dusty. It looked as though Walter had stepped out for lunch and might return at any moment. Naomi walked slowly through the workshop. Her fingers brushed the surface of the workbench. The wood was worn smooth from decades of use. Thousands of hours were etched into every mark and scratch. Lumber was stacked neatly against the rear wall. Different species were organized by size and type. Oak, cherry, walnut, maple. Far more wood than any hobbyist should have needed. She frowned. Something felt strange. She couldn't explain why. Then she noticed it. A thin, vertical line behind the stacks of lumber. At first, she thought it was a crack in the concrete wall. But when she moved closer, she realized it was too straight, too deliberate. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she pulled several boards aside. The line became clearer. A hidden seam. A door. The surface had been painted to match the surrounding wall so perfectly that it was nearly invisible. Naomi stared. "What were you doing in here, Dad?" she whispered. There was no handle, only a small brass keyhole. She searched the workshop. Drawer after drawer revealed pencils, measuring tapes, clamps, and woodworking supplies. Nothing else. Finally, inside the center drawer of the workbench, she noticed something taped beneath the wood. Her fingers found a small object, a key. Another brass key, older than the first. Its edges had been worn smooth by years of use. Her heart pounded. She walked back to the hidden door. For a moment, she hesitated. Crossing this threshold felt significant, as though she were standing between the father she had known and the father she had never met. Then she inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a soft click. The hidden door slowly swung inward. Cool air drifted out, along with the scent of aged wood. Naomi stepped inside and stopped. The room beyond was enormous, at least twice the size of the workshop. Morning light poured through a high window. Dust floated through golden beams. But it wasn't the room that stole her breath. It was what stood inside it. Furniture. Beautiful handcrafted furniture, a massive dining table, elegant chairs, towering bookshelves, a walnut bed frame, a writing desk, a rocking chair. Every piece looked museum-worthy. Every surface gleamed. Every curve had been shaped by patient hands. Naomi moved toward the nearest chair. A small paper tag hung from one armrest. She picked it up. Her breath caught. Written in Walter's careful handwriting were two simple words: for Naomi. Confused, she walked to the bookshelf. Another tag. For Naomi. The writing desk. For Naomi. The rocking chair. For Naomi. Every single piece carried her name. Naomi slowly turned in a circle. The room held decades of work, years of dedication, a lifetime of craftsmanship, and somehow every piece belonged to her. Tears blurred her vision. She lowered herself into one of the chairs and stared at the tags hanging gently in the sunlight. The $10 garage was not a garage at all. It was a secret, and Naomi had only just opened the door. On the far side of the room, resting neatly atop the writing desk, sat a thick, leather-bound journal. Beside it was something that looked very much like a bank book, and for the first time, Naomi realized that her father's greatest secret might not be the furniture. It might be the life he had hidden behind it. For several minutes, Naomi remained seated in the chair. The hidden room was silent, except for the faint ticking of an old wall clock she hadn't noticed before. Sunlight streamed through the high window, illuminating the furniture that surrounded her. Every piece carried the same small tag. For Naomi, the words felt impossible. Walter Ashcroft had never been a man of grand speeches. He rarely talked about emotions. He showed love through actions. Fixing a broken fence, changing a flat tire, bringing soup when someone was sick. Yet somehow, over the course of decades, he had filled an entire room with gifts intended for her. Slowly, Naomi stood and walked toward the writing desk. The leather-bound journal waited exactly where she had first seen it. She carefully picked it up. The cover was worn from years of handling. The corners were softened with age. When she opened it, neat handwriting filled the first page. H. W. Miller, Volume 1. Furniture Journal, 1984. Naomi frowned. H. W. Miller? The initials meant nothing to her. She turned the page. The first entry contained a detailed drawing of a side table. Measurements covered the margins. Notes about wood grain, joinery, finishes, and construction methods filled the page. Walter's handwriting was unmistakable. She continued turning pages. Each entry documented another piece of furniture. Tables, bookcases, dressers, cabinets, writing desks, rocking chairs. The sketches were extraordinary, precise, professional, beautiful. And beside nearly every entry appeared another notation. Sold to Theodore Quinn, $4,500. Sold to Theodore Quinn, $7,800. Sold to Theodore Quinn, $12,000. Again and again, the same name appeared. Theodore Quinn. The dollar amounts steadily increased over the years. Naomi's eyes widened. She flipped through more pages. The numbers became larger. $15,000, $18,000, $22,000, $31,000. The room suddenly felt very different. Walter had not been building furniture as a hobby. He had been selling it. For decades, her father, who had worked behind the counter of Grayson Supply and Hardware for over 30 years, had somehow built a second life that nobody in the family knew existed. She sat down at the desk and continued reading. Volume after volume filled the shelves beneath the writing surface. The journals covered nearly 40 years. Every design, every sale, every improvement, every lesson learned. The hidden room was not simply a workshop. It was the headquarters of an entire career. A secret career. Then she noticed something written inside the front cover, in smaller handwriting, almost hidden. W equals Walter Henry. Miller equals Margaret's maiden name. Naomi stared at the words. A lump formed in her throat. Even his secret identity had included her mother. Walter had carried Margaret into every piece he built, every sale, every success. The realization made the room feel even more personal. Carefully, Naomi closed the journal. Her attention shifted toward the object resting beside it, the bank book. She picked it up. Its cover looked newer than the journals, much newer. With growing curiosity, she opened it. The final balance appeared near the bottom of the last page. Naomi froze. Then she read it again and again. $341,876. Her pulse quickened. The number couldn't be right. She turned back through the entries. Deposits stretched back for years. Every amount matched sales recorded in the journals. Furniture had become money. Money had become savings. Savings had become a fortune. Then she noticed the account holders listed at the top. Walter H. Ashcroft, Naomi E. Ashcroft. Her breath caught. Walter had placed her name on the account. Not recently, years ago. The earliest records proved it. This had been planned long before his death, long before Margaret became ill, long before anyone could accuse him of acting impulsively. Naomi slowly sat back in the chair. Everything Harold Bennett had said suddenly returned to her. Your father spent 2 hours writing the will. Each child should receive exactly what they need. The words made more sense now. Walter had known exactly what he was doing. The $10 garage had never been worth $10. It contained decades of craftsmanship, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and an inheritance hidden so carefully that Victor and Caroline had never thought to look twice. A sudden memory surfaced. Samuel Grayson, Walter's closest friend, owner of the hardware store, the man who had known her father longer than anyone else. If someone knew the truth, it would be Samuel. Naomi pulled out her phone and searched her contacts. His number still sat there. She hesitated only briefly before pressing call. The line rang once, twice. Then Samuel answered. Naomi? His voice sounded calm, almost unsurprised. She swallowed. Samuel, I found something in Dad's garage. There was a long pause. Then Samuel sighed softly. I was wondering when you'd call. Naomi looked around the hidden room, at the furniture, the journals, the bank book, the 40 years of secrets. And suddenly, she knew the truth. Samuel had known about this all along. The question was, how much? And whether her father had left behind even more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Samuel Grayson arrived less than 10 minutes later. Naomi heard his pickup truck pull into the gravel lot outside the garage. A moment later, the workshop door opened. The 70-year-old hardware store owner stepped inside, carrying a worn canvas jacket over one arm. His gray hair was thinner than Naomi remembered, but his broad shoulders and steady walk remained unchanged. For decades, Samuel had been one of the few constants in Walter's life. The two men had worked together for over 30 years. If Walter had trusted anyone with his secrets, it would have been Samuel. Naomi met him in the workshop. Neither spoke at first. Samuel's eyes drifted toward the hidden door standing open at the back of the room. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "So," he said quietly, "you found it." Naomi crossed her arms. "You knew." Samuel nodded. "I did." The admission came so easily that it caught her off guard. "You knew all these years?" "I helped your father build part of the outer workshop when we were younger." Naomi stared at him. "You never told anyone?" "No." "Not even me?" Samuel shook his head. "Especially not you." That answer surprised her. He walked slowly through the hidden doorway and entered the secret room. His eyes moved across the furniture, the journals, the desk, the rocking chair, the same objects he had likely seen hundreds of times before. Yet his expression softened with familiarity, almost affection. "He really did it," Samuel said quietly. "What?" "He built exactly what he always said he would." Naomi frowned. "What are you talking about?" Samuel lowered himself carefully into one of the dining chairs. The chair supported him effortlessly. "Your father started building furniture when he was 23. Naomi remained standing. "He never mentioned that." "He wouldn't." Samuel chuckled softly. "Walter wasn't interested in attention." He looked around the room. "Back then he built little things, birdhouses, end tables, shelves, and then he got better." Samuel paused. "Much better." The older man's eyes settled on the rocking chair near the window. By the time he was 35, he was building furniture that professionals twice his age couldn't match. Naomi glanced around the room again. For the first time, she began seeing the furniture not as objects, but as evidence. Evidence of mastery. Evidence of thousands of hours spent learning and improving. Samuel continued. Then he met Theodore Quinn, the dealer from the journals. Samuel nodded. Theodore owned a small gallery in Portland. He specialized in handcrafted furniture. He bought Dad's work? He practically begged for it. Naomi blinked. Samuel laughed. "You should have seen Walter's face the first time somebody offered him $5,000 for a dining table. What happened?" He thought the man was crazy. The memory clearly amused him, but Theodore knew talent when he saw it. Samuel pointed toward the journals. Everything changed after that. Naomi sat across from him. "And H.W. Miller." Samuel smiled. "That was Margaret's idea." "What?" "Your mother hated the thought of Walter becoming famous." Naomi couldn't help smiling. That sounded exactly like Margaret. "So they created a fake name. H.W. for Walter Henry. Miller was Margaret's maiden name." Samuel's smile faded slightly. "They thought it would be temporary." "It wasn't." "No." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Then Naomi asked the question that had been growing in her mind. "Why keep it secret?" Samuel looked at her carefully. For the first time, his expression became serious. "Because your father saw what money does to families." Naomi waited. He watched cousins stop speaking to each other over inheritances. He watched siblings fight in court for years. He saw good people become strangers because of greed. Samuel folded his hands. And he worried. "Worried about what?" "You." Naomi frowned. "Me?" Samuel nodded. "About 10 years ago, Walter sat in my office after closing. The old man stared toward the workshop wall as though remembering every detail. He told me he'd been saving money for years. A lot of money. He said if certain people ever learned how much was here, they'd start seeing numbers instead of relationships." Naomi immediately thought of Victor. The thought made her uncomfortable. Samuel continued. "So Walter hid everything. The room, the account, the journals, the furniture. even the value of the property, the $10 appraisal. Naomi stared at him. He arranged that himself? Samuel nodded. Called the county assessor personally. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. All this time, all this planning, all this secrecy, for one reason: protection. Samuel stood and walked toward the writing desk. Then he opened one of the drawers. Inside was an empty space. He nodded to himself. Good. What? That means he already expected you'd find this room. Naomi frowned. What do you mean? Samuel looked at her. A strange expression crossed his face, something between sadness and respect. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. I suppose it's time. From inside, he removed a sealed envelope. Old, yellowed, carefully preserved. Walter Ashcroft's handwriting covered the front. For Samuel Grayson, to be given to Naomi only after she finds the room. Naomi's heart stopped. She stared at the envelope. There were still more secrets, and somehow her father had planned for this moment too. Naomi stared at the envelope in Samuel's hand. Every instinct urged her to open it immediately, but before she could reach for it, her phone began vibrating inside her pocket. The screen lit up. Victor. Naomi felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She glanced at Samuel. He noticed the caller ID and sighed. That didn't take long, Naomi answered. Hello? Naomi. Victor's voice carried the controlled tone he always used when building a legal argument. Quick question. She already knew she wasn't going to like where the conversation was heading. What is it? I've been going through some of Dad's paperwork. Naomi remained silent. Victor continued. I found several references to Cedar Hollow Lane. Her grip tightened around the phone. So I'd like to know what's in the garage. For a moment, Naomi looked around the hidden room. The furniture, the journals, the bank book, the secret life her father had spent 40 years protecting. Then she made a decision. Old tools, she said. A workbench, some lumber, nothing more. The line went quiet. Victor was not a man who accepted incomplete answers. Finally, he spoke. You're lying. Naomi closed her eyes. Excuse me? You're hiding something. I've barely been there. Naomi. His voice hardened. I know when people are withholding information. Of course he did. He'd spent 25 years as an attorney. I told you what I found. Another pause. Then Victor said something that made her heart sink. Caroline and I are coming this weekend. What? We'll be there Saturday morning. There is no reason for that. I'll decide that when I see it. Before she could respond, the call ended. The workshop suddenly felt colder. Samuel shook his head. Your father expected this. Naomi looked at him. Expected what? Victor. The old man carefully handed her the envelope. Walter loved all of you, but he understood people. Naomi slipped the envelope into her jacket pocket. A sense of dread settled over her. 3 days later, Saturday arrived. Gray clouds hung low over Cedar Hollow Lane. Naomi arrived at the garage shortly before 10. She unlocked the front door and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, a rental SUV pulled into the lot. Victor climbed out from the driver's side. Caroline stepped out beside him. Neither looked happy. Neither looked relaxed. They looked determined. Victor approached first. Morning. Naomi nodded. Morning. Caroline offered a small smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. Without another word, Naomi led them into the workshop. Victor immediately began examining everything. The workbench, the tools, the stacks of lumber. His eyes moved constantly, searching, calculating, analyzing. Caroline seemed different. She paused beside the pegboard, ran her fingers along the outlines where Walter's tools had hung. For a moment, sadness crossed her face. Dad spent a lot of time here. Yes, Naomi replied quietly. He did. Then she walked to the hidden door. Without speaking, she unlocked it. The concealed entrance swung open. Sunlight poured into the secret room beyond. Victor stepped inside first and stopped. The reaction was immediate. His eyes widened. His entire body went still. Behind him, Caroline gasped softly. The furniture stood exactly as Walter had left it. The dining table, the rocking chair, the bookshelves, the writing desk, each masterpiece glowing beneath the afternoon light. Neither sibling spoke. For several long seconds, silence filled the room. Then Victor slowly walked toward the desk. Naomi recognized the look on his face. It wasn't wonder. It wasn't grief. It was valuation. He was calculating, assessing, estimating, the way lawyers evaluate assets. Meanwhile, Caroline approached one of the chairs. She noticed the tag attached to it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the words. For Naomi. She looked at another tag, then another. Every one carried the same inscription. For Naomi. "What is this?" she whispered. Naomi didn't answer. Victor had already reached the desk. Within seconds, he found the journals. A moment later, he discovered the bank book. His expression changed instantly. "What?" He flipped through the pages. "Read the balance." Read it again, then looked up. $341,000. Naomi said nothing. Victor set the bank book down carefully. Too carefully. The movement reminded Naomi of a man handling evidence in court. "You're telling me Dad hid all of this?" "Apparently." "And you weren't going to tell us?" The accusation hit harder than she expected. Naomi crossed her arms. "I had only just found it myself." Victor ignored that. His attention returned to the room. The furniture. The account. The journals. The hidden wealth. "This changes everything." "No," Naomi said quietly. "It changes nothing." Victor laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Are you serious? There is over $300,000 here. There are assets, property, intellectual value." He pointed toward the furniture. "Do you have any idea what some of this might be worth?" Naomi looked at him steadily. "It belongs to Dad." "It belonged to Dad," Victor corrected. "Now it's part of the estate." "No." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, no?" Naomi met his gaze. "The will gave me the garage." Victor's expression hardened. "The will gave you a building. It didn't mention hidden assets. It didn't mention secret bank accounts. It didn't mention valuable collections." The room suddenly felt much smaller. Caroline looked back and forth between them, uncomfortable, anxious. Victor buttoned his jacket, the same gesture he always made before a legal battle. Naomi knew that gesture well, and for the first time since discovering the room, she understood exactly what her father had feared. Victor wasn't seeing Walter's life anymore. He was seeing numbers, and the fight Walter had spent years trying to prevent had finally begun. Victor left the garage angry, not shouting, not threatening. That wasn't his style. Victor Ashcroft became dangerous when he grew quiet. Before leaving, he had delivered only one final sentence. "This isn't over." Then he climbed into the rental SUV and drove away. Caroline lingered a little longer. She stood beside the dining table, running her fingers over the smooth wood surface. "Dad made all of this?" Naomi nodded. "Every piece." Caroline looked around the room. For a brief moment, she seemed less interested in the money than in the man who had created it. "I never knew." "Neither did I," Naomi thought. A few minutes later, Caroline left as well. The garage fell silent. Again, Naomi sat alone at the writing desk. Outside, afternoon sunlight stretched across the workshop floor. Inside, Walter's hidden world waited quietly around her. She stared at the envelope Samuel had given her, the one Walter had left behind. For several days, she had avoided opening it. Part of her feared what she might find. Another part wanted to preserve the mystery a little longer. But now, with Victor preparing for a fight, Naomi felt ready. Carefully, she broke the seal. Inside was a short note. "Naomi, if you're reading this, you found the room. Good. There's more. Look beneath the desk. Love. Dad." Naomi frowned. She turned the note over. Nothing else. For several moments, she sat staring at it. Then she slid open the center drawer. Nothing seemed unusual. Pens, pencils, measuring tools, the journals. Then she remembered something. Her father had hidden an entire room behind a false wall. A hidden compartment would hardly be impossible. She examined the drawer carefully. At first, she saw nothing. Then her fingertips brushed a narrow groove beneath the bottom panel. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she pressed downward. A soft click echoed inside the desk. The bottom panel lifted. Naomi froze. A secret compartment. Inside lay 5 envelopes, perfectly arranged, each one labeled in Walter's handwriting. Naomi at 10. Naomi at 20. Naomi at 30. Naomi at 40. And a smaller envelope simply marked, "For Naomi." Her throat tightened. With trembling fingers, she opened the first letter. Naomi at 10. The paper crackled softly. "Dear Bug, yesterday I watched you give half your lunch to a little boy at school. You didn't know I was there. You didn't know I saw it. He didn't ask for anything. You just noticed he was hungry. You gave him the bigger half of your sandwich. That's when I realized something important. Kindness comes naturally to you. Never lose that. Love, Dad." Tears blurred her vision. She opened the second envelope. Naomi at 20. "Dear Bug, You told me you're going to become a nurse. Your brother wants to be a lawyer. Your sister wants to work in business. Both are fine choices. But you chose a career where people spend their days helping strangers. That tells me everything I need to know about your heart. I am proud of you. Love, Dad. Naomi pressed her lips together. The room seemed strangely smaller now, filled with memories, filled with Walter. She opened the third envelope. Naomi, at 30. The words hit harder, much harder. Walter wrote about Nathan Reeves, the man Naomi had once imagined marrying. Walter admitted he had discovered an engagement ring hidden in Nathan's coat pocket. He had known a proposal was coming. Then Margaret became sick. Naomi moved home, and Nathan slowly disappeared from her life. Walter wrote only one sentence that shattered her completely. You gave up the future you wanted without asking anyone to notice. But I noticed. Love, Dad. A tear landed on the paper. Then another. For several minutes, Naomi couldn't continue. The grief she had carried for years suddenly returned. Fresh, sharp, unfinished. Eventually, she opened the fourth envelope. Naomi, at 40. This letter was different. Walter described her caring for Margaret. The sleepless nights, the doctor visits, the confusion, the fear, the exhaustion, every sacrifice, every hidden burden. And then she reached the final paragraph. You came home when nobody asked you to. You stayed when it became difficult. You stayed when it became painful. You stayed when it cost you almost everything. I see you, Bug. I always have. Love, Dad. Naomi lowered the letter. Her face was wet with tears. The hidden room faded around her. All she could see was her father's handwriting. All she could hear was his voice. For years, she had believed her sacrifices had disappeared into silence. Now she knew the truth. Walter had seen every single one. Finally, she picked up the smallest envelope for Naomi. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Short, simple. When you finish reading these letters, go see Samuel. He has what you need. Trust him. Trust yourself. I love you, Dad. Naomi sat motionless. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the workshop. Inside, Walter's words settled into her heart. Then she looked toward the door. Samuel has what you need. Whatever her father had planned, it wasn't over yet. And somehow, Naomi knew the biggest secret still hadn't been revealed. The next morning, Naomi drove straight to Grayson Supply and Hardware. The store had not changed in decades. The faded sign still hung above the entrance. The old wooden floors still creaked beneath every step. The smell of lumber, paint, and machine oil filled the air. For a moment, Naomi could almost picture her father standing behind the counter, talking with customers and pretending he lived an ordinary life. Samuel was waiting in the back office, almost as if he had known she would come. He looked up when she entered. You read the letters? Naomi nodded. Every one of them. Samuel leaned back in his chair. Then you're ready. The words made her nervous. Ready for what? Without speaking, Samuel opened the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet. He reached all the way to the back. Then he removed a thick manila envelope sealed with clear tape. The handwriting on the front was instantly recognizable. For Naomi Ashcroft, to be opened only after she finds the room. Naomi's pulse quickened. This is what Dad left with you? Samuel nodded. 2 years before he died. He made me promise 3 things. What things? Don't open it. Don't give it to anyone else. And don't hand it to you until you found the room yourself. Naomi stared at the envelope. Even now, Walter was still guiding events, still protecting something. Carefully, she broke the seal. Inside were 3 separate items. A legal document, a sealed envelope addressed to Victor and Caroline, and another letter addressed to Naomi. She picked up the legal document first. The title immediately caught her attention. Codicil to the last will and testament of Walter H. Ashcroft. Naomi sat down. Her eyes moved quickly across the page. The language was formal, precise. Every paragraph had clearly been written by an experienced attorney. Then she reached the section that mattered. The codicil stated that all contents of the garage located at 18 Cedar Hollow Lane, including furniture, tools, journals, financial accounts, workshop materials, designs, intellectual property, and all assets associated with the H.W. Miller name, were to become the sole property of Naomi Ashcroft upon discovery. Naomi read the paragraph twice, then a third time. She looked up at Samuel. What is this? Protection. The answer came instantly. Samuel folded his arms. Your father spent nearly 2 years making sure nobody could challenge his wishes. Naomi stared at the document. There were witness signatures, a notary seal, attorney certifications. Everything appeared official. Everything appeared airtight. Walter had anticipated exactly what Victor would do, and he had prepared for it. She picked up her personal letter next. The paper felt familiar, comforting. Walter's handwriting filled the page. Dear Bug, if you're reading this, then you found the room. You found the letters. And Samuel kept his promise. I knew he would. There were many nights I wanted to tell you everything. Many nights I almost did, but I couldn't risk it. Not until I knew it was protected. Victor understands the law. Caroline understands money. Both are good people, but neither understands sacrifice the way you do. Everything in that room belongs to you. The furniture, the tools, the account, the journals, the name. All of it. You gave us years of your life. Years nobody can ever return to you. I wanted to leave you something that could help you build the future you postponed. You deserve that chance. Love, Dad. Naomi lowered the letter slowly. Her vision blurred. Even now, Walter somehow knew exactly what she needed to hear. Not gratitude, not praise, permission. Permission to live again. Samuel remained quiet while she composed herself. Finally, she looked toward the third envelope, the one addressed to Victor and Caroline. What does this say? Samuel shook his head. I never opened it, but Dad told me one thing. What? Samuel's expression softened. He said it was the hardest letter he ever wrote. The room fell silent. Outside, customers moved through the store. The sounds of ordinary life continued. Inside, Naomi stared at the envelope. Victor had already threatened a legal challenge. Sooner or later, the confrontation would come. When it did, that letter would matter. So would the codicil. So would everything Walter had prepared. A few hours later, Naomi carried the documents to Harold Bennett's office. The attorney read the codicil carefully. Then he checked the signatures, the notarization, the witness information. Finally, he removed his glasses. A slow smile appeared on his face. Your father was thorough. Naomi leaned forward. What does that mean? It means this document is valid. He tapped the codicil. Completely valid. Relief flooded through her. Harold continued. The account was already joint ownership. That alone places it outside the estate. Combined with this codicil, he shook his head. Victor would have almost no chance of overturning it. Naomi released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time since discovering the room, she felt safe, protected. Walter had thought of everything, but one final task remained. Harold looked across the desk. What do you want to do now? Naomi glanced at the envelope addressed to her siblings. Then she thought about Victor, about Caroline, about the years that could never be changed, and about the truth her father wanted them to hear. I want a meeting. Harold nodded. All 3 of you? Yes. When? Naomi looked down at Walter's handwriting, then back at the attorney. As soon as possible, because the legal battle her father feared was about to begin, and the final words he left for his children were finally about to be heard. 5 days later, the 3 Ashcroft siblings sat once again inside Harold Bennett's office. The room looked exactly the same as it had during the original reading of the will. The same desk, the same chairs, the same rain tapping softly against the windows. But this time, everything felt different. Victor sat on the left. Caroline sat on the right. Naomi occupied the middle chair. No one spoke. Harold opened a folder and carefully placed the codicil on the desk. This document has been verified, he said. It was legally executed 2 years before Walter Ashcroft's death. Victor immediately picked it up. His eyes moved across the pages. Once, then again. More slowly. The tension in his jaw became visible. He planned this. Nobody answered. Victor looked up. He spent years planning this. Harold nodded. Yes. Victor leaned back. The garage. The hidden room. The account. The codicil. It was all intentional. It was. Silence settled over the office. For several moments, nobody moved. Finally, Victor looked directly at Naomi. Why? The question sounded different than before, less angry, more wounded. Why would Dad do this? Naomi reached into her purse. Slowly, she removed the sealed envelope, the one addressed to Victor and Caroline. She placed it on the desk. He answered that himself. Caroline stared at the envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside were several pages covered in Walter's familiar handwriting. She began reading. The first few lines quietly. Then she stopped. Her face changed. The color drained from her cheeks. Without speaking, she continued reading silently. Tears gathered in her eyes. When she finished, she passed the letter to Victor. He took it carefully. The room remained silent as he read. Walter's voice seemed to fill the office. Not angry, not cruel, simply honest. The letter began with the same words it ended with. I love you both. Between those words, Walter told the truth. He described calling Victor every week after Margaret's diagnosis. He wrote about the conversations that lasted only minutes, about updates that were met with polite sympathy, about promises to visit that rarely became reality. He never accused, never attacked. He simply described what happened. Then came Caroline. Walter mentioned the checks she had sent, the birthday cards, the occasional phone calls. Again, there was no anger, only facts. 2 checks, 5 years, nothing more. Finally, Walter wrote about Naomi, how she packed her life into 2 suitcases, how she came home without being asked, how she stayed, how she carried responsibilities that should have belonged to all 3 children, how she gave up relationships, career opportunities, freedom, sleep, time, the things no one could ever repay. Victor reached the final page. His eyes lingered on the last paragraphs. The house went to Victor because Victor wanted a house. The savings went to Caroline because Caroline wanted money. The garage went to Naomi because she was the only one who would walk inside and look. I love all 3 of my children. But love does not require blindness. If you are angry, read this letter again in 5 years. Perhaps by then, you will understand what I already know. Love, Dad. The room remained silent. Victor lowered the pages slowly. His hand rested on top of them. Nobody rushed him. Nobody spoke. Outside, rain continued striking the windows. Inside, the truth sat between them. Heavy, impossible to avoid. Finally, Victor exhaled. The sound seemed to drain years of tension from his body. I'm not filing a challenge. Harold nodded once. The codicil is solid. Victor shook his head. That's not why. He looked down at the letter, at Walter's handwriting, at the words he could never argue against. Then he looked at Naomi. For the first time since arriving, there was no anger in his eyes, only regret. I should have come home. The sentence hung in the room, raw, unprotected. Naomi felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. For years, she had wanted to hear those words. Now that they had finally arrived, they brought no victory, only sadness. Yes, she said quietly. You should have. Victor nodded. His eyes glistened briefly. He stood, buttoned his jacket, then stopped. For a moment, it seemed he wanted to say more, to explain, to defend himself, but he didn't. Some truths required no explanation. He simply turned and walked out. The office door closed softly behind him. Caroline remained seated. Tears slipped silently down her face. Dad knew. Naomi looked at her. Yes, he knew everything. The realization seemed to break something inside her. All those years, all those excuses, all those rationalizations, gone. Walter had seen everything, and he had understood exactly what each child had chosen. Caroline wiped her eyes. I kept telling myself I was helping. Naomi said nothing. There was always work. There was always something else. Her voice cracked. I thought sending money mattered. It helped, Naomi said gently, but it wasn't the same. Caroline nodded, because now she understood. Money could buy medicine, but it couldn't sit beside a frightened mother at 3 in the morning. It couldn't hold someone's hand. It couldn't stay. After a few moments, Caroline reached across and squeezed Naomi's hand. A small gesture, but a sincere one. Then she stood and left. Harold waited until the door closed. Your father was a remarkable man. Naomi smiled softly. He'd hate hearing that. Harold laughed. Probably. She looked toward the rain-covered window, toward the parking lot where her siblings had just driven away. The fight was over. The inheritance was secure. But Walter's greatest victory had never been legal. It was something much harder. He had forced his children to face the truth. And sometimes, the truth changed people more than any courtroom ever could. That afternoon, Naomi returned to the garage. The hidden room welcomed her with its familiar stillness. She sat in the rocking chair Walter had built. The letter rested in her lap. Outside, the rain slowly faded. Inside, she read her father's words one more time. And for the first time since his death, she felt something close to peace. 6 months later, Naomi Ashcroft stood on the front porch of a small craftsman cottage on the west side of town. The house wasn't large. It wasn't impressive. It didn't have a grand staircase or a sprawling yard, but it was hers. For the first time in many years, the future belonged to her again. The cottage sat beneath a row of maple trees, whose leaves turned gold each autumn. A narrow stone path led to the front steps, and a wide window overlooked the tree line beyond the backyard. Most people would have seen an ordinary house. Naomi saw something different, a beginning. Inside, Walter's furniture had found its home. The dining table stood in the center of the kitchen. 5 chairs surrounded it. The 6th chair remained at the workshop. The tall bookshelf covered an entire wall of the living room. For weeks, Naomi unpacked boxes she had never opened after leaving Burlington. Old novels, nursing textbooks, family photo albums, a bird guide Margaret had given her when she was 12. The walnut bed frame occupied the master bedroom. The writing desk sat beside a window overlooking the backyard. Inside its hidden compartment rested Walter's letters. She still read them sometimes, not because she needed reassurance anymore, but because hearing her father's voice on the page felt like sitting beside him again. The rocking chair occupied a place of honor near the front window. Every evening, sunlight spilled across its polished armrests. Every evening, Naomi spent a few quiet minutes there. The garage on Cedar Hollow Lane changed too. The old sign disappeared. In its place hung a new wooden plaque, Walter Ashcroft Woodcraft House. She had carved the letters herself. The secret no longer needed hiding. The workshop had protected Walter's legacy. Now, it would share it. Samuel helped her prepare the space. Together, they cleaned decades of dust from forgotten corners. They repaired lights, organized tools, refinished benches. When Naomi offered to pay him, Samuel waved her off. "Your father spent 30 years listening to my stories," he said. "I still owe him." The first woodworking class attracted only 4 people: a retired mail carrier, a teenage boy looking for something to do after school, a woman who had always wanted to learn furniture making, and Samuel himself, who spent most of the afternoon pretending not to supervise. The second class attracted 7 students, then 10, then 15. Soon, every Saturday was full. People came for different reasons. Some wanted to learn woodworking. Others wanted company. Some simply needed a place where they could build something with their hands and forget their worries for a few hours. Naomi never charged money. The hardware store donated supplies. Local businesses contributed scrap wood. Walter had built for love. She wanted the workshop to do the same. One rainy Tuesday in November, a young woman appeared in the doorway. She looked exhausted, nervous, lost. Her name was Olivia Hart. She had recently left an unhappy marriage and was sleeping on a friend's couch. She knew nothing about woodworking. "That's okay," Naomi told her. "Most people don't." Olivia returned every week. At first, she barely spoke. She measured, cut, sanded, learned. Slowly, she changed. Confidence replaced fear. Laughter returned. 3 months later, she had saved enough money for a small apartment and built a bookshelf entirely on her own. When she proudly showed Naomi the finished piece, one shelf leaned slightly to the left. Olivia frowned. "It's crooked," Naomi smiled. "But it stands." Sometimes that was enough. Spring arrived, then summer. One Sunday morning, Naomi sat on her porch drinking coffee when her phone rang. "Victor," she answered. "Hi." His voice sounded different, quieter, less certain. "I was in town last week." Naomi listened. "I drove past the old house." A pause. "It looked smaller." She smiled softly. "It always does when you come back." Victor laughed, a genuine laugh, the first she'd heard in years. Then came another pause. "Naomi?" "Yeah?" "I'm sorry." Just 2 words. No excuses, no explanations, no defenses, only truth. Naomi looked out across the yard. The morning breeze stirred the leaves. "Thank you," she said. Another silence. Then Victor cleared his throat. "How's the workshop?" "Busy." "Good." A beat passed. "You know, I'd like to see it sometime." Naomi smiled. The doors open. A month later, a letter arrived from Caroline, handwritten, several pages long. She admitted her mistakes, admitted her absence, admitted that writing checks had been easier than showing up. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply told the truth. And for Naomi, that mattered. The letter joined Walter's letters inside the desk, a reminder that people could change, even after years of getting things wrong. That evening, Naomi sat in the rocking chair beside the front window. Golden sunlight filled the room. The scent of linseed oil lingered in the air. Walter's furniture surrounded her. The life he had quietly built for her surrounded her. She held the birthday letters in her lap. 4 envelopes. 4 decades. A lifetime of love hidden in plain sight. Outside, the sun slowly dipped below the trees. Inside, the house grew quiet. Naomi thought about Walter, not the craftsman, not the secret artist, not the man known as H.W. Miller, just her father. The man who brought her to the garage on Saturday mornings. The man who called her Bug. The man who watched her share a sandwich with a hungry child and never forgot it. The man who spent 40 years building furniture and spent a lifetime building something even more important. A legacy, not of money, not of property, not of inheritance, but of kindness, of sacrifice, of showing up when it mattered. Walter Ashcroft's greatest gift had never been hidden behind a secret door. It had been hidden in every quiet thing he taught by example. The rocking chair moved gently beneath her. The room grew darker, and for the first time in many years, Naomi felt completely at peace. Her father's chair held her the way he always had, steady, strong, and without needing a single word.